That day, I stepped into the grand ballroom of the Chicago Tower, where the crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations. The gentle melody of a string quartet mixed with the confident chatter of the city's financial elite. I saw powerful faces, wore expensive suits, and flashed polished smiles that barely masked their calculated intentions. Today was my father's retirement party. Arthur Vance, the chairman of Vance Legacy Group, the man who had built a financial empire from the ground up. Or so the story he always told went. I, Leo Vance, 35 years old, the youngest son and chief human resources officer of the company, stood in the middle of that glittering crowd with a heart as heavy as lead. It felt like I was walking into a trial where no one had bothered to tell me my crime. I straightened my tie, forcing a polite smile as a few colleagues offered a nod of greeting. Their eyes held a strange mixture of curiosity, pity, and a hint of something that looked like clinical detachment. For 13 years, I had poured my soul into Vance Legacy Group. I completely overhauled the HR department, retained hundreds of valuable employees during market crises, and stabilized the company when it felt like everything was on the verge of collapse. I didn't do it for the money or to compete for power. I did it for honor. I did it for the desperate, childish hope that I might one day earn my father's notice, to receive just one of the proud looks he so freely gave my older brother, Julian. But deep down, a part of me knew that hope was as fragile as a spider's web in a storm. The ballroom was a sea of light. Tables were dressed in crisp white silk, and wine glasses shimmered under the chandeliers. And there, on the stage, stood my father, Arthur Vance. At 65, he looked like a king surveying his domain. He wore a perfectly tailored silver-gray suit, and his voice, when he spoke, was deep and resonant with a lifetime of authority. He raised his glass, his eyes sweeping over the crowd, and I felt my pulse quicken, waiting for something. A nod, a small acknowledgement. Anything to show that my years of sweat and dedication hadn't been invisible. Ladies and gentlemen, my father's voice boomed, slicing through the murmurs in the room. Today is a special day. After nearly 4 decades of leading Vance Legacy Group, I have decided to retire. This is a moment to reflect on what we've achieved and to look toward the future. Thunderous applause erupted. I stood near the back, by a wall draped in rich velvet curtains, feeling as though I were being physically pushed to the outer edge of my own family. I watched my father, my breath held, hoping he'd mention me, even with just a single, brief sentence. But then he continued, his voice as sharp as cut glass. All assets, control, and the legacy of Vance Legacy Group will be passed to my eldest son, Julian Vance. The room exploded. The applause was deafening, mixed with shouts of congratulations. Julian, who was 38, strode onto the stage with the effortless confidence of someone who was born to rule. My older brother, with his perfect smile and sleek black suit, accepted a tight, proud embrace from our father. They stood there, bathed in the stage lights, a flawless portrait of success and dynastic power. My chest tightened until it felt like all the air had been vacuumed out of the room. But I stood my ground. I kept smiling. I kept clapping, even as my hands trembled. Then, my father returned to the microphone. His gaze swept the crowd again, and I felt it. The chilling certainty that my world was about to shatter. His voice was as cold as steel, and each word he spoke was a dagger aimed directly at my heart. As for my younger son, Leo, he paused, as if my name was something bitter on his tongue. He is the greatest mistake of my life. If he had never been born, perhaps this family would not have suffered so much loss. The room fell deathly silent. The applause died instantly, leaving only the faint, intrusive clicks of cameras from the press corner. I stood there, feeling the floor beneath me dissolve. A hot flush of shame burned my face, then turned to an icy cold. I wanted to scream, to rush the stage and demand why. Why would he say those words in front of hundreds of people? In front of the world? But I couldn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor. My heart felt as if it had simply stopped beating. Every eye in the room turned to me. Some looked with pity, as if I were a stray dog abandoned on a busy street. Others smirked, their discreet but razor-sharp smiles cutting me deeper than any insult. The colleagues I had worked with, The ones I had shared sleepless nights with to save the company, now avoided my gaze, as if looking at me for too long would taint them with the failure my father had just branded me with. I heard the whispers, words brushing past me like a cold wind. It's hard to understand. Leo did so much for the company. Why would he say that about his own son? But no one dared to speak up. No one dared to stand. And I just stood there, my heart a hollow cavern, as if everything I had built over 13 years had been wiped away by a single, cruel sentence. I wanted to run, to escape that place, but then a voice cut through the suffocating silence. "Mr. Vance." The voice was sharp, filled with a righteous fury I immediately recognized. It was Chloe, my wife. She stood up from her seat in the middle of the audience, her eyes blazing like fire. "You cannot speak about my husband like that. Leo has dedicated 13 years to Vance Legacy Group. He revamped your systems, retained your top talent, and stabilized this company through countless crises. You owe him recognition, and he deserves his share of the inheritance." The room buzzed again. A few people nodded, as if admiring Chloe's courage. But I saw the look in other people's eyes, skeptical, cold, especially when she emphasized the word inheritance. I knew Chloe loved me, but I also knew she craved the stability and security that money brought. In that moment, I wasn't sure if she was standing up for me, or for something else. Still, for a fleeting second, I felt a small flicker of comfort. At least someone in this world was willing to fight for me. My father, on stage, gripped his wine glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. His face reddened with anger, but his voice remained chillingly calm. "My dear daughter-in-law, you're interrupting my event. I suggest you leave immediately." He signaled to security, and two large men in black suits began moving toward Chloe. She looked at them, then at me, her eyes a mix of defiance and pain. "Leo, are you just going to stand there and let them treat us like this?" she pleaded, her voice trembling. I wanted to say something, to pull her back, but I was frozen, my mind a swirling vortex of shame, humiliation, and a confusing flicker of gratitude that she had spoken for me. Chloe lifted her chin, walking out of the row before the security guards could touch her. "Let's go, Leo," she said firmly. I followed her silently, feeling the weight of every stare like an arrow in my back. We walked out of the ballroom and into the cold Chicago night, the silence between us heavier than any words could ever be. The frigid wind stung my face, but it was nothing compared to the gnawing pain in my chest. We reached our car in the parking garage without saying a word. I opened the door for Chloe, and she slid in, her gaze fixed out the window, her hands clutching her purse as if it were a life raft. I got into the driver's seat and we drove away in a silence that was deafening. Every time I tried to open my mouth, my throat felt parched, as if my father's words had stolen my ability to speak. The drive from the tower to our apartment, which had never felt long before, now stretched into an eternity. With each passing block, the silence between us grew heavier, like an invisible wall rising, separating us. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind replaying the scene. My father's cold voice, and Chloe's eyes, filled with anger, disappointment, and pain. When we returned to our apartment on the 12th floor, the place that had once been our sanctuary was now just a cold, empty space. All the warmth seemed to have been drained away the moment we left that party. Chloe walked in and tossed her purse onto the sofa with a sharp, angry thud. She stood with her back to me, her beautiful brown hair hiding the face I once thought was my entire world. "I can't believe you, Leo," she said, her voice laced with a trembling reproach. "You just stood there. You let your father humiliate you in front of everyone, and you didn't say a single word. Not one." I closed the door, trying to keep my voice calm. "Chloe, you know I'm not the kind of person to cause a scene. I didn't want to turn it into a public battle." She spun around, her eyes on fire. "A battle? Leo, you lost the war long ago. For 13 years, you poured your sweat and soul into that company. And for what? To be publicly shamed. Your father called you the greatest mistake of his life, and you stood there smiling like an idiot." Her words were knives, each one finding its mark. "Chloe, I did it for honor. for the family, I whispered, trying to make her understand. She let out a bitter, icy laugh. Honor? Family? Do you really think that family cares about you? Your father chose Julian, Leo, the golden boy who never had to work a day for anything he was given. And you? You're the leftover son. No power, no inheritance, no future. You're a failure. The word failure echoed in my head. I looked at Chloe, the woman I had loved for so long, who had once promised to stand by me no matter what. There was no trace of tenderness left in her eyes, only cold disappointment. But, you stood up for me, I said, confused. You demanded my father acknowledge me. Why would you do that if you think I'm a failure? She looked at me, her lips pressed into a thin, mocking smile that chilled me to the bone. You think I stood up for you, Leo? I stood up for the inheritance. For the life we were supposed to have. I can't spend my life with a man who can't even fight for himself. You let them walk all over you, and now we have nothing. Her words hit me like a physical blow. You mean, you only care about the money? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chloe didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, looking down at the river of city lights below. I'm tired, Leo. Tired of living in the shadow of your family. Tired of waiting for you to stand up and claim what you deserve. But you can't. You never could. And I can't live with that. My heart felt like it was being crushed. Chloe, what are you saying? She turned back, her eyes now devoid of anger, just chillingly cold. I want a divorce, Leo. The word exploded in my mind. Are you serious? I stammered. Dead serious, she replied, her tone flat. I can't live with someone who has nothing. Nothing to protect himself, and nothing to protect us. You chose your honor, but honor doesn't pay the bills. I'm done. I wanted to ask her how she could be so cruel, how the love we shared could evaporate over one night. But I was speechless. I watched as she walked into our bedroom. The sound of her suitcase dragging across the hardwood floor was like a funeral drum. She packed her things, the dresses I'd bought her, the items we'd chosen together in happier times. Each zip of the suitcase was a fresh cut to my heart. Chloe, can we please talk about this? I begged. We've been through so much. The door slammed shut, and I was left alone in the echoing silence of our home. The city lights outside seemed to mock me, unable to dispel the darkness that had enveloped my life. I sank onto the sofa, the fragments of my shattered dreams scattered all around me. A few days later, a thick envelope arrived. It was the official divorce petition. She wanted half of everything. I felt no anger, only a profound, hollow emptiness. The city of Chicago kept moving, but I, Leo Vance, was left with nothing but a broken heart in an empty apartment. In the days that followed, I was a ghost in my own life. I drew the curtains and shut out the world, but there's no escaping yourself. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. Standing there was my uncle, Marcus Vance, my father's younger brother. He was a quiet man, the family's lawyer, always working behind the scenes. In his hand was a sealed brown envelope. Leo, he said, his voice warm but serious. We need to talk. I let him in. He placed the envelope on the table. This is something your grandfather, Edward Vance, left for you. He told me to give it to you when the time was right. My heart pounded. What time? I asked, my voice hoarse. Uncle Marcus looked at me with deep empathy. When you were stripped of your inheritance or treated unjustly by your own family. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a supplemental will and a handwritten letter from my grandfather, the only person who had ever truly seen me. My dearest Leo, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means our family has strayed from the values I tried to build. I feared this day would come, when power would blind your father, Arthur. You are the only one I trust to protect the true legacy of our family. Not because of your talent, but because of your integrity and kindness. Don't let your goodness be a weakness. Stand up, Leo, not for power, but for the honor I have placed in you. Tears blurred my vision. The supplemental will was legally binding, indisputable. It stated that if I were ever treated unjustly, all shares and control of Vance Legacy Group would pass directly to me. Not to Julian. Not to my father. To me. What do I do now? I whispered, looking at my uncle. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You have to decide, Leo. But remember, this isn't about revenge. This is a fight for honor. The honor your grandfather entrusted to you. She paused at the door but didn't look back. There's nothing left to say, Leo. You chose your path. Now I have to choose mine. Leo's journey is far from over. He now holds the key to his family's empire, but using it will mean declaring war on his own father and brother. What would you have done in their place? Would you use the will, or would you walk away? Let us know in the comments. And who do you think was wrong here, him or her? Was Chloe justified in leaving, or was it a betrayal? If this story is touching you, please give it a like. Your like helps these untold stories reach someone who might be going through their own difficult time and needs to feel understood. And don't forget to subscribe to Tales Flicks for more real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart.